So I practice a martial art called Kudo, which is very similar to MMA in the way we fight full contact, strikes to the head, grappling, throwing, submissions. Big differences between Kudo and MMA is the use of headgear. Of course, Kudo is just amateur competition, it's not a professional sport. So for that reason, I think headgear is vital in order to be able to fight full contact as an amateur and still be able to have a regular job. Now, there are a lot of pros and cons to the use of headgear, and that's what I want to get into in this video. And maybe even for professional MMA fighters, using headgear like this sometimes in the dojo could have its advantages. Let's take a look at that. First of all, what are the pros to using this kind of headgear? Well, as I touched on there, for one thing, it protects you from superficial damage. That means cuts to the face, bruises, swelling, black eyes, broken noses. You know, these things can happen in sparring in the dojo. And it's not a good look. Depending on what kind of job you have, you may not want to be showing up to work looking all beat up. Okay? So this certainly helps to negate that. It also allows for the use of elbows. Now, elbows are allowed in MMA competition. They're allowed in Kudo as well. But if you watch guys sparring in MMA dojos with big gloves on, they usually aren't able to throw elbows in sparring. How are you going to get good at doing something if you don't use it in sparring? Sure, you're going to drill it on the mitts, but it's not the same. When you are using this kind of headgear in sparring and using your elbows consistently when you're doing your sparring, this will help your elbow technique get better, your timing, your distance. And that is one reason why I would suggest sometimes trying out the use of headgear if you're in a sport that allows for the use of elbows. Even when I was doing Muay Thai, we never wore any headgear like this, and we would practice elbows on the pads, but we never could do them in sparring, and that was a bit of an issue. It was when I started doing Kudo that my elbow technique got better because I started throwing elbows all the time. Another thing in Kudo is we use headbutts. Yeah, you can throw headbutts with this kind of headgear on. You can't without headgear on. So if you're someone who, say, is doing martial arts for more self-defense purposes, then the use of this type of headgear gives you the ability to practice headbutts in a sparring situation. And never underestimate the effectiveness of headbutts. Great tool. Another advantage to using the headgear is you don't have to wear those big gloves when you use this. You can use MMA gloves, smaller gloves, okay? Now, throughout my training, I trained nights in a gym where I was sparring with no headgear and large gloves, so 14 or 16 ounce gloves. And other nights I would train with MMA gloves and Kudo headgear. So I was training both ways for many years, maybe 16, 17 years I did that. So I was able to compare the two, okay? So one thing I found with fighting with the big gloves, it's so much easier to defend with big gloves. You've got these great big gloves, they're giving you all this surface area which you can hide behind. You can just move your hand up in cover and you're protected against another great big glove. And it's easy to defend with big gloves on. But if you're someone fighting MMA or Kudo or something that doesn't use a large glove in the ring, in the fight, then you're not going to be able to defend yourself as well once you get into the actual fight, because you're so used to having these larger sparring gloves on that when you get a smaller fighting glove, it's a different size. Especially if you're going from big 16 ounce gloves to little MMA gloves, it's completely different. So being able to train and spar with small gloves in the gym, where you will be forced to really tighten up your defense. So you can't just get your hand here and be protected. You've got to really get your whole arm up. If you want to protect against a hook or something, you've got to really cover up like this. If you don't, the little fist is going to get through. So for learning and practicing defense, having sessions where you wear headgear and small MMA gloves for sparring gives you the opportunity to do contact sparring in MMA gloves with elbows, and that will really help you work on your defense. One of the problems defensively with wearing headgear is that your head is a bigger target, which means you will get hit a little bit more. Punches which might usually just miss or just slightly graze you will make more contact, or more likely to make contact when you've got the headgear on. There's also the issue of reach. A punch that might not reach you without the headgear, when you put it on and it's sticking out, it makes contact. So there are pros and cons. Understanding those, I think, is what's important. One of the advantages to using large sparring boxing gloves in your sparring sessions is that it will help you get used to contact, getting punched in the face. One thing I've seen over the years with the use of headgear is a lot of guys get complacent with getting hit because it doesn't hurt as much. Now, I'm not going to say it takes all the pain out of sparring. It doesn't. It's still not comfortable getting hit in this headgear. But it's not as bad as getting that glove, that leather, smack right in the face. There's definitely less sting to it. I think you do need to incorporate sparring, even if you're just a Kudo practitioner. I think it's important to include some sparring without the headgear, using gloves, so that you do get more accustomed to getting that contact to your face. Otherwise, in say a self-defense situation where you're obviously not wearing headgear, unless you walk around with your headgear on, then I think it's important to have some experience at getting punched in the face. But with regards to getting complacent with getting hit because you're wearing headgear, that's really up to you as a fighter to not let that happen. Work on your defense. Anytime you take a hit to the face, think of it as a potential knockdown. Don't let yourself get hit just because you got this on. Another problem with sparring with big boxing gloves is you can't grapple. You can't grapple with those big gloves on. You can't grab onto anything, okay? They're in the way. It's hard to get your hands through gaps and things. It's just terrible trying to grapple. So if you're sparring MMA, big gloves are just not very effective. On the other hand, if you're sparring in MMA gloves, wearing headgear, you can grapple. You can do all your grappling. So you can practice MMA style sparring, okay? That's a big plus for the headgear. Now, there's also a problem with grappling in headgear, and that is it's harder to get your head out of certain situations, like a guillotine choke is a perfect example. You get caught in a guillotine choke with this headgear on, it's very hard to get your head out. And usually what happens is the headgear ends up coming off when you pull your head out of a guillotine choke or any kind of a headlock type situation. So that is a problem. There's also the breathing issue, okay? It is a lot harder to breathe in these. I remember the first time I tried sparring with the Kudo headgear on, I couldn't wait to get this thing off my head. I thought I was gonna die after one round. And you do gas out faster wearing headgear. There's definitely less oxygen. But look at it this way. A lot of fighters will do like oxygen deprivation training where they're wearing masks to cut down the amount of oxygen that they take in order to condition their bodies to fight with less oxygen. So I try to look at it positively like that. This is my oxygen deprivation training tool. So, and I find that when I take the headgear off in spar, I have a lot more in the tank. I can go for longer. Another problem with headgear is fogging up. When you're breathing heavily inside these things, the plastic fogs up and you can't see. You're fighting blind. But that's an easy fix. If you just use anti-fog sprays for motorcycle helmets, you just spray it inside and give it a light wipe with a cloth. It's good to go, it won't fog up. Or the cheaper version, just use dishwashing soap. Another con to the headgear is hand injuries. Yes, this plastic face is hard. And if you're punching it with MMA gloves or no gloves, like we often do in Kudo, there is the risk of hurting your hand. Accidents happen. And as if to illustrate my point, yes, my finger is broken, and yes, I broke it from punching a headgear, Kudo headgear, okay? These accidents will happen. Your opponent can move his head into a punch or slightly back, and you're making you overextend. Anything that can happen can make you connect with your fist in a slightly awkward way, and it can lead to injuries. So I have actually broken my thumb in a Kudo competition before from a hook that landed awkwardly. I've also broken my finger before once, I think, in sparring. So this is the second time I've broken a finger. So 3 broken bones from sparring and fighting in this headgear for me. Maybe it's not going to happen to you. Maybe it will. I recommend wrapping your hands. So when we compete in Kudo, we do wrap our hands, but the hand wraps are super short. There's really not enough to wrap your hand properly. It's either a choice of getting your wrist and your thumb supported or getting your knuckles some support. You can't do both. So it's really a bit of a waste of time. I never use those in the gym. I prefer to use other brands that have longer wraps with some stretch to them that will give me more support to my fist and protect me. I wasn't wearing wraps when I broke my finger. Also in Kudo, when we compete, we don't wear MMA gloves. We just wear these thin fist supporters. Okay, this is super thin. It's just like a cloth supporter, and it's more just to protect your hand from cuts. So these are really don't have that much of a practical purpose either. They're not going to protect your hand, that's for sure. So at the dojo in training, I would always wear MMA gloves when I was sparring with headgear on. However, this year in Japan, they have stopped us from using MMA gloves in the dojo. Presumably because of the added risk of, or potential risk of head trauma wearing MMA gloves. I don't know how much science there is backing that decision up, but anyway, that has been the decision. I also don't know how many dojos are actually complying with that, whether all the dojos are just using these thin supporters in their regular sparring sessions or if they're still using MMA gloves. One of the worst things I've seen is some dojos, I think are in Russia, somewhere around there, where guys are wearing big boxing gloves with this headgear. That's the worst thing you can do. That's just asking for head trauma there. The added size of the glove surface area, added surface area here, just leads to more contact, more throwing your head around, more rattling your skull, and that's where the brain damage comes from. So yeah, bad idea. Don't use headgear and big gloves to spar. Okay? the thing about this headgear is it will not protect you from brain damage, okay? That is something I really want to get across in this video. There have been a lot of studies that have led to the ditching of use in headgear in some amateur boxing in recent years. And that's because they found that it really doesn't protect you against head trauma. It's really just a protection against superficial injuries, okay? Your head, your brain, whenever you get hit, it's your brain rattling around inside your head when your head gets thrown in different directions that causes the brain damage, okay? It's not the sort of surface impact so much as the movement of your brain inside your skull, okay? So this headgear doesn't protect you from that happening. That's why you see KOs just as often in Kudo competition as you will in competition without headgear. Guys are still getting knocked out, okay? So don't make the mistake of thinking this will protect you from brain damage. So when you are sparring in the dojo, think about that, okay? One of the things about wearing headgear is it can give you this psychological mindset, okay, that, oh, I'm safe, I've got headgear on, I can go hard. And I think we all do it. I'm guilty, yeah. I put the headgear on and I tend to go harder, okay? But we have to really control ourselves in that area and try to remember that all these little impacts, and especially it's the impacts in sparring over time, over many years, that leads to trauma. Now, I don't know of any cases of head trauma injuries in Kudo yet, but it's still a very young martial art, so something to consider, especially if you've got kids doing it, starting from a young age. I've seen some videos, again, in Europe, Russia kind of area, of little kids, like 5-year-olds, whacking each other full power in the head because they got this headgear on thinking it's safe. No, it's not safe. Especially not safe for young, undeveloped brains. That's just asking for problems later in life. You guys need to think about what you're doing there, okay? So take that into consideration. Lately in the gym, with sparring, I actually do rounds where we take the headgear off and just do like no contact sparring with MMA gloves and no headgear. So we're not making contact. Takes the adrenaline out of it. It makes it a little bit more playful, gives you room to try things out, practice things, relax a little bit, work on different things that you might not have the courage to work on when you're going at it. Okay, I think it's very important. Something I learned when I was training in Thailand is that the Thais would be very playful in their sparring, and that's where they would really develop their technical ability, through this playful kind of sparring. Whereas in other dojos I've been in other martial arts, kickboxing and Kudo and whatnot, there tends to be a lot harder sparring. And I've actually noticed that guys can tend to not improve as fast when they're constantly sparring hard. Okay, yes, you do need to spar hard sometimes. You do need to get used to that. But you don't have to do it all the time. In fact, it's better not to do it all the time. Okay, you need to combine light sparring sessions and with the occasional hard sparring session. It's better for working on your technique. It's better for saving your brain. Just better all around. Okay, so those are some of the pros and cons to using the headgear. I do recommend this headgear for various martial art practices because of the realism it brings, because of the giving you the ability to use elbows, headbutts, to force you to work on better defense, to give you the ability to do MMA style sparring as opposed to just striking sparring. It has many benefits, but of course there are those cons you also need to be aware of. Just remember, train hard, but train safe. Os.